Alright, chat. So let's talk about Granfia. It's one of my favorite Vanguard decks, and it's also the deck that got me into the format. But unfortunately, it's been kind of relevant recently because of the announcement of Estacion, which is the Stoicheia Skyride starter deck that was announced a couple weeks ago. They use a similar mechanic. Granfia has the Noblesse Rose token, while Estacion has the Blast token, and they both use Plant Gauge. And a lot of people are saying recently that Estacion is going to replace Granfia, and that Granfia's time is over, and support is kind of going to be like relegated to Estacion dual support, kind of like how Granfia's been relegated to Leonore dual support for a while now. But I want to kind of push on back on that, and that's because Estacion has more of a mid-range playstyle, while Granfia has a way more explosive write-up that kind of differentiates it from other decks. But I think a lot of people are saying that Estacion will make Granfia irrelevant because they play Granfia in a very orthodox way that I don't necessarily agree with. And because they play in this orthodox way, they miss a win con that Granfia has uniquely that I want to talk about today. So let's talk about the Noblesse Rose. So the Noblesse Rose is a token that sits on your back row center column, and every time you make a token, it goes automatically to the Noblesse Rose as gauge. It includes all of the tokens that you had on field before it as well. And for every plant token that gets gauged to the Noblesse Rose has 5,000 power extra. That stands in contrast to Estacion's Blast token, where the Blast token doesn't automatically convert tokens to gauge. You have a certain limit on how many gauge you can have per turn as a Session. In addition, it's 5,000 to front row for every 3 tokens. While Noblesse Rose only gets 5,000 for each token to itself, because Granfia has Rosarium Fairy, which you might know from Leonore, one of the more popular decks in the game, because the Rosarium Fairy can get the power from the Noblesse Rose, and the Noblesse Rose boosts the Vanguard with all of its power, and Granfia stands a rearguard. Essentially, that means that every 5k is Vulture because it applies to the whole front row, and you have 4 attacks to spread that across. That is a lot of power, and this 55,000 power I show you here is, I would say it's a mid to low roll. I on average get much higher than this, and I'll show you a board that I had last locals later. But we also have a card called In the Forest Flourishing in Silver White, which is half of the reason why the rose can get so big. Its effect is that you choose one of your rear guards, and it gets 5,000 until end of turn for each one of your grade 1 or less rear guards. And that counts out to 25,000 usually, because Granfia has a lot of grade 1 or less rear guards. Your fairies grade 1, your token generators are grade 1, your Noblesse Rose is grade 0, so you usually get 25, which over 4 attacks counts out to 100,000 in value, which is very, very free. And one of the strengths of this deck is that it is a plant token deck, which means that because you can put out plant tokens with such efficiency, you can typically tri-lane very easily. Here's an example of a 2-card board, so Shrooms and Eliana, which makes 2 5k guards and 1 15k guard attack. But you can have, let's say you open 2 Shrooms and 1 Eliana, that's 3 15k guards, which your opponent will typically let 3 go because they're fishing for defensive. But even if they hit a defensive on the first attack, the other 2 attacks will still hit. So you can put a very strong early rush. Granfia has access to plant token generators that other plant tokens decks don't have. For example, Roro has to run a lot of cards that don't generate plant tokens, like Momoke, the grade 2, the 2 Radalina types. Granfia has access to a lot more plant token generator choices than the other decks. Rosarium Fairies maybe also makes plant tokens, so even if you don't draw the plant tokens you want, the plant token generators you'd rather have, you can still make a complete board pretty easily. And even if you don't have Eliana, you can still form tri-lanes. So other strengths include the fact that with the combination of Silver White, your deck has plant token generation for so cheap that hitting numbers like 88,000 is relatively easy. I wouldn't say this happens every game, but these are numbers that I hit from a game I had last week at locals against the Levidros. I have 10 tokens here on my Noblesse Rose for 55,000 power, plus the 25,000 from Silver White to make 80,000 on my Rose, which means that my Rosarian Fairies are swinging for 88,000, but if you boost them with the 8k booster, it's 96k. And that is a lot of power. A lot of, you would say, big swings. For example, El Calibra is famous for its big numbers. They don't come close to this. So let's take an example of a turn with the other plant token deck that's generally considered to have very large numbers, which is Claudine. So if you take every buff that you can get on Claudine without Persona Ride, the plant token can get 5k from Hakusui and Remred, the Stoicheia Dragon Empire Dual Nation. It gets 5k from Claudine, and it gets 10k from the order Blessing to the Flowering Buds. So that makes the plant token 25,000. Adding the 28,000 boost from the Garlic, you swing for 53,000 2 times per turn because the Garlic restands. And what 53,000 demands is 45,000 shield worth of guard. And that typically comes down to 3 cards. So that's a 3-card guard of 315Ks. Maybe they'll have a front instead of a heal. Maybe they guard with 2 fronts and a piece. But 3-card guard is typically very, very strong in Vanguard. And a lot of people will perfect guard these swings out of convenience, because it's a 3-card guard and a PG is 2 cards and they can discard something that's lower shield value. However, if you swing with 88,000, that demands 80k guard. An 88k guard is very difficult to guard, especially when you can pull these numbers off turn 3 going second. So 80,000 guard can be 4 fronts. However, that's the most compact you can get it, and it's a problem because 4 fronts, most decks don't run 4 fronts. They run 7 crit, they run 8 crit 3 front, which means, and they won't see all of the fronts by the turn that you're trying to kill. A more common hard guard might be 1 front trigger and 4 15Ks. If they don't have a front, they have to go 5 15Ks and 1 piece for 5k shield. A lot of decks can't hard guard that, and they might not want to hard guard that, so they'll start taking damage even though they took a lot of damage from the early rush earlier. And if they guarded the hard rush earlier, they probably won't have the shield to hard guard any of your attacks on the turn 3 kill, because the game is just formatted for a much lower power bracket. A lot of decks end up reaching around between the 43 and 53 with Persona Ride. So decks draw shield over time, and a lot of decks aren't prepared to handle numbers this big, which is a huge bonus for Granfia. And the main reason why I think this deck has an advantage that other decks don't. And that's not just the rearguard attacks I'm talking about. Because the rearguard swing, the Noblesse Rose rearguard gets so big, your Vanguard swing is pretty much PG or die. If they don't have a PG, they usually cannot hard guard this out of the risk of it breaking, because your trigger can go to the Noblesse Rose, and because the Noblesse Rose boosts Granfia, but can also be, the power can be copied over to the Rosarian Fairy. It means that the trigger power will get recycled, and the opponent would rather no guard the Vanguard, and if the triggers go into Rosarian Fairy, they'll hard guard that instead. And a lot of decks in the format don't have a strong Vanguard column. We have Rezael, we have Levidros, even Befsargra doesn't get above, say, 60k pre-Persona Ride. So I think Granfia has the advantage of one of the strongest Vanguard attacks in the game. Second to maybe only Silhouette, which has a myriad of own problems that makes Granfia superior. So, however, the deck does have some weaknesses that we need to talk about. So one of the problems is that if you want to go for all of this power, you have to forego a lot of the draw cards that Granfia can run. Granfia can run the support it shares with Leonorn is Luster Impact Dragon. It also can run Darien, which is a plant token generator, but only generates one. And Yolanda, which is -2 plant gauge to draw one, even though it gets 10k. So it's technically even, but the problem is that if you run these draw cards, you're sacrificing a lot of power gain. And when you go down the power bracket, suddenly there are decks that can output more attacks, they can draw a lot more cards, and I think you're putting this deck into a bracket where there are decks that do better things than it, and you're not playing to the deck's strengths. Another weakness is that because you rely on scamming the opponent out of not being able to hard guard any of your swings, it doesn't have the greatest matchup against decks that can search their PGs. So examples of that are Ava and Archite, because they can grab the monster PG off Torrential Energy Research, or Night Rose, which is a very common deck, I would say, that can dig the PG out of deck with Philander, or maybe they used it to guard an earlier attack, and they call it out to drop with Alvina, and use the Hostage Order to put the PG to Guardian Circle from a rearguard circle. The last weakness I would say that's a real weakness is that the deck relies so much on Rosarian Fairy that we have to run consistency cards that we would rather run plant token generators in place of if we had more consistency options in archetype. We have to run the Fire Regulist, we have to run Mythiarch Habitat, and we have to run Cooter to search Mythiarch Habitat in order to make it work. And it doesn't always end up with a double Rosarium turn. So you do have to accept that sometimes you will miss out on a whole swing of 80k, and it's just the way variance works. But the deck, I wouldn't say this is a weakness because of the way we play it, but you do have to watch out for fake hands. The deck has to run a lot of orders, so you have to mulligan very carefully. In the rare case that you do draw too many orders, it's not too much of a problem. Habitat's only used for the first 2 turns, so you can guarantee your usage and conserve your plant tokens in generators in your hand. If you draw more than 1 silver white, you're going to have to start discarding from PGs or using them in earlier turns to maybe force them, but you can use them on earlier turns. It's not too much of a break, but you do have to watch out in case it does happen. It shouldn't happen often. It's not a weakness, but this deck doesn't get much support, and it might become a weakness later on if the game keeps power creeping. So in between the set where it got Rosarian Fairy and the set where it got Roalua, there was a wait of 1 year and 4 months, and in that time, it was the deck to go the longest without any named support. And even in DZB205 Omniscient Awakening, it only got 1 card of support. So it seems like Bushiroad isn't really interested in giving this deck any upgrades at the moment, which is not going to reflect well on it if early game options keep getting better and better. For example, in DZB207, we have the Persona Shield generators, which are a defensive option that helps curb sort of Granfia's offensive approach. And there are a lot of decks with very high offensive output, like Youthbrook Reval Form exists. We just saw that recently. So if Granfia doesn't get support to help its consistency issues, because we don't need more ceiling, we just need more consistency. But if it doesn't get that, there are better decks with more attacks, with more draw, that we can be playing. And that's a problem. But there's a weakness that a lot of people talk about with Granfia that I don't really consider a weakness if we play it the way I'm playing it, which is that if the Noblesse Rose doesn't have protection. Unlike Estacion, which the Blast token is unaffected by opponent abilities, Granfia's Noblesse Rose doesn't have protection, which is a problem if you intend to go through your grade 3 turn, end your turn with your opponent living, and let them go through a turn before you go on turn 4. There's a lot of decks with removal right now. Messiah removes, Odium with Anachronous Dragon removes, Glory Maelstrom removes, Vermilion, which I didn't have on the slide here, removes. But Sargra needs to run the hammer to retire a back row rigor, but that removes. Varga has full board removal, and Impodio got retire recently in DZBTO7. But if you intend to kill on your grade 3 turn going second, you don't really run into this problem because your Noblesse Rose isn't available to be removed. So if you just play smart and don't commit your Rosarian Fairy down early, all they're going to be doing is sniping plant tokens or maybe Eliana, and that's not really a big enough roadblock to say that removal is an issue for the deck. So I think if you play this deck in a very orthodox way, removal's a weakness. But if you play it the way I'm going to introduce to you with the list on the next slide, it's not really much of a problem. So let's get to the list and the theory behind my list. So this is the deck that I am running. I played at locals. There's some adjustments that still need to be made to the ratios, but I'm very comfortable saying that this is what the theory should be based on what the metagame is right now and with what Granfia has. I know it looks weird because it doesn't run a lot of cards, and I'll explain my rationale for not why we don't run those cards, but first let's talk about the cards we do run. So first we have to run the Granfia ride line. I see a lot of people make the theory mistake that because Roroa ride line makes more tokens, that automatically means it's the correct ride line to run, and that's really not the case. Granfia and Roroa's ride line grade 1 both make the same amount of tokens, but it just comes later. But that's not where the point of contention comes up. The point of contention comes up with the grade 2. So Granfia's grade 2 ride line says if your rearguard has a plant token and your soul has the grade 1 Granfia in its soul, then when you ride to your grade 3, you can ride for free. So that means you discard one less. Whereas Roroa's ride line says to retire a token on ride and retire a rearguard and make 2 tokens. So if we math it out, Roroa typically you want to retire a token to make 2 tokens. I think I don't play Roroa, but it makes sense to me that it's the cheapest thing to do, and you don't want to retire a piece unless you have a Signpost Fairy. That means you have a profit of 1 token, which is not great. Let's say that. With Granfia, you conserve 1 card in hand, which means you're not discarding a piece. And that piece typically has a lot higher value than making 1 token. For example, Pumpkin is 2 tokens and an AK body. Your main beater also makes 2 tokens, and Shrooms will make 2 tokens, but also give 5k to Rose, which essentially is a 3rd token for the purposes of your kill turn. So, I mean, I'm just saying that there's a lot higher value to the grade 2 Granfia than there is to the grade 2 Roroa. As for our offensive front row lineup, we have Broccoli, which is CB1 draw. It's the only draw that I think we can fit into the deck comfortably at this time. It's 15k attacker. That's also 10k shield, which helps bear the pressure of the opponent's attack when they ride up to grade 3. But it also means that if you have a 10k plant token in the back, it swings for 25k on an opponent's 10k Vanguard, which means they need to either have like a blitz order that guards for 20k, or they need to give up 2 cards no matter what, and that's kind of a deal breaker, and they'll typically no guard that, which is very good. Rosarian Fairy doesn't need to be explained, but Rowalua is the new card that we got in DZBTO5. It was not good in that set, but with Silver White you're able to boost its numbers up, and because it's a 2 crit attacker, if your opponent guarded early and you need to make up a damage gap while your opponent has less cards in hand, Rowalua can sometimes come in clutch, and I think that now it's worth including into the deck. As for plant token generation and back row, we have Pumpkin, which yields 2 tokens out of an axe skill. We have Shrooms, which yields 2 tokens and 5k once you hit grade 3. Eliana's a crucial piece of your rush lineup. I know it doesn't sound right because you don't have plant tokens after you hit grade 3, but you can retire it with your Rosarium, and the Rosarium will make 2 tokens off of Eliana's body. And Cooter, same, you can retire it, but it can grab Habitat in case you need to see Eliana no matter what, based on the matchup, or if you need Silver White but you didn't draw into it, Cooter's the way to get to it. As for your Regulus piece, I think Fire Regulus is the only way to go at this time. Before it came out, I think what you needed to do is Twin Cast, because Twin Cast would have sort of made it easier to live to your grade 3 kill turn. 2 options I see brought up really often are Radiance Caliburn, because you draw 2 cards. I don't think that's the right thing to do, because drawing 2 cards doesn't necessarily guarantee you draw into a plant token generator. And if you're playing to kill on your grade 3 turn going second, like I mentioned earlier, removal's not much of a weakness. And I'd rather have the normal order for turn play used on Mythiarch Habitat to ensure that I have my second Rosarium, rather than give up, like, for something that doesn't guarantee a kill turn. So I think Twin Cast was the right call in previous metas, but Fire Regulus acts like a Mythiarch Habitat you can use when you have an order play for turn. So like turn 3, you don't have enough, but you saw your Fire Regulus, so you can play your Silver White and your Fire Regulus skill at the same time. So I think Fire Regulus is the way to go right now. What you notice is that I don't run Personas, and that's because we already hit numbers so high that there's not really any point in running Personas, especially if we expect the game to end quickly, or we either kill them quickly or we die quickly. So there's no point in running Personas, especially when they don't offer any plant token generation value. They just take up what could be potential shield value. There's just no point. I only run 3 PGs in this deck because I needed the space, because we don't need to live that long anyways. But you might notice that I don't run Elementaria, and that's because Elementaria needs a discard unless your opponent is on triple drive, and that's only relevant to Odium, because Odium's the only one that can do triple drive turn 3 going first. That's kind of a relevant deck in the meta. So in that case, a normal PG is more important in case, let's say, your last 2 cards in hand due to your opponent's very strong rush is your PG and your Rosarium. So you PG for free, you don't need to discard to ride up, so you get your draw for turn and your draw off EV7. So you have 3 cards to work with on your ride up, and that's because you went second. So I think normal PG is more important to have than Elementaria, especially when you might not even get the benefits of Elementaria to begin with. I don't run Luster, Impact Dragon, or Darien, which are 2 important draw cards that more orthodox Granfia builds run, and I want to explain why. So Luster has a problem where it needs to be stood by your Granfia, which means that it's going to take your stand for turn. And you'd rather not do that because it requires a huge commitment. Your Vanguard needs to be 33,000, but when you remove tokens to restand something, your Vanguard's power is going to go down. So the minimum token amount you need to leave on your rows is 3 to make 33,000, unless you pull triggers, which isn't great because that's more than 1 plant token generator worth of value. So if they retire it, you're wasting value, and you don't get enough out of it for Luster Impact to be worth using, in my opinion. If the deck had more going first tools and the rows had protection, I think Luster Impact would be viable, but as it stands, I don't think going for the draw and going first when we have such explosive going second tools is worth it, especially when it leaves us vulnerable. Darien has a problem where its draw only comes after he has a Noblesse Rose. So whatever you draw comes after your main phase, and you can't use it to extend. And because we can't use it to extend, the draw isn't particularly useful, and I'd rather spend that CB on Friendly Broccoli. But also, it only makes 1 token per turn, whereas you can get 1 token per turn early game with your Farm and Pumpkin. But Farming Pumpkin turns into 2 tokens on your grade 3 write-up turn, and because it's an act, you can use it. You can call over it, and then call more, use more token generators with that rearguard slot, or you can use Rosarium to retire the body to make 2 more tokens for maybe 4 tokens off of the body. Whereas Darien, you can't retire because it needs to stay on field, so it's not really worth using if your goal is to kill the opponent. As for non-Granfia related cards that I don't use, some people will talk about Hakusui and Remred for the early game. The problem with that is Eliana just does the same job. It's same power ceiling, it just doesn't make a token, which is fine because Hakusui and Remred needs a counterblast. And I'd rather spend that counterblast on Broccoli, but Hakusui and Remred also needs to be called from hand, which is a problem because the deck doesn't draw early game, besides your going second draw, so you need to habitat for Eliana to get the power. As for Yuzuyu, which is a generic, Counterblast 1 is less value than Farm Pumpkin. It's as simple as that. And the last weird choice you might see me make is the Nilch, which is the counter heal for when your grade is less than the opponent's grade. And that's because if we are always going second, the turns that we are relevant to defense for us, we're always going to be a lower grade. We're going to be grade 1 when our opponent's grade 2, and we're going to be grade 2 when our opponent's grade 3. So having a 20k shield for the turns that are relevant to us, then rather than having a 15k shield for all turns, including the ones that we won't access, I'd rather have the 20k shield, especially when it does come up in some matchups where, say, they have a 28k attack or a 25k attack in the case of like Alden. Alden has 25k attacks. So we'd rather have the counter heal than a vanilla heal. So let's talk about the game plan, which I've kind of gone over, but I think there are some specifics I want to cover in this video. So you might have been able to tell by now, but I believe in the always go blind second. No matter what your opponent's deck is, you need to try and go second. And that's because not only are your beaters limited to opponent going second to get the value out of them, Rosarium needs opponent grade 3 to use its power gain, and Roalua needs opponent grade 3 to get its crit, but you also get 2 draws of your starter and your EV7. And because we can't fit any other energy eaters like the Guncyclers or Alvina, because we need the space for plant token generation, we need to rely on that EB7 to draw 1. But we also get that extra battle phase, which is really important, because if we can do 3 attacks on our first battle phase, 3 attacks on our second battle phase before you ride up, that is a lot of shield to ask of the opponent to deal with when our numbers are so high that usually they'll be between 3 and 4 damage if they're lucky and hit some defensives. And a lot of times they will be at 5 if they couldn't hit any defensives because we have that extra battle phase. So it is really crucial that we go second. For mulligans, Eliana makes our early game great. If you see it, keep it. Silver White is our win condition. See it, keep it. Ideally, we want to have plant token generators other than Rosarium Fairy, like Pumpkin and Shrooms. But in a pinch, if Rosarium Fairy is the only plant token generator we get, that's fine. I don't think it's bad to keep a PG or a heal trigger in your hand in this deck, because we need to be prepared to not guard anything. Because we want to get to this kill turn while keeping our cards in our hand, we need to take only like 1 damage in our opponent's first battle phase, because that leaves us with 4 damage that we can freely take and fish for defensives. 1 CB is usually enough because we want to use Broccoli to CB1 draw 1. You can no guard. You can guard them all if you want to, if you somehow have the cards, but a lot of decks can only do 4 to 5 attacks at that stage in the game. So ideally, you want to take 1 and then guard, no guard 4 later. So to keep that low, we want to keep a trigger and then maybe a PG if it's a deck that demands it. The ideal formation, of course, is double fairies. That gives us the most power and the most kill potential. But if you can't get that, or if your opponent's at a low enough damage, but they have low cards in hand because they guarded early. Sometimes it might be better to do Roalua, especially if you can't get enough plan tokens to compensate even though you have silver white. So if you have Roalua and you plan to use it, you need to have 7 gauges minimum, because Roalua is going to eat 1 gauge on its first attack, and then you're going to eat 5 gauges using the Vanguard skill for 25k to Roalua, and then you're going to eat 1 more after it attacks. Pardon me. So that means at a minimum, your Rosarium is going to swing for 48, boosted for 56, and then you want to boost with on your first thing Roalua, because 40k is not a very good number. 40k is guardable by 2 15ks, whereas if you add that extra 8k, 48k needs to be guarded by 2 fronts or 3 15ks. So boosting is really important for this first swing. And then on the second Roalua swing, it's going to be for 65k, which is still a really rough ask, especially since it's 2 crit. So this is a number that's higher than Claudine, which is why I think Granfia takes this niche in the numbers department, even when it has to lose numbers in order to be able to hit 2 crit. In the worst case scenario, you have to run 2 Roalua in the front row, in which case you're going to have weak swings, even if it's 2 crit. But it also takes 8 gauge as a higher requirement, but that's the worst case scenario. You usually will see 1 Rosarium, assuming you mulligan correctly for it. This is a very loose condition. For matchups, let's talk about some of the more common decks you might face. For example, Rezael, there's 2 points I think you need to be especially careful of. One, I think you need to fill the board as much as you can immediately, because Sergeon is on if they don't have an order, but they have more rear guards than you. So if you have a full board, they can't turn Sergeon on unless they swing into your plant token in the front row. They can't really swing into Broccoli because it's 15k base. So they either have order, they give up attacks, or they just don't activate dog, and that means they can't farm perfect guards as easily, which is good for our deck. The second thing to watch out for is Gabrielius, which we cannot guard because our goal is to push them as fast as we can. We can't really deny Gabrielius because Sergon makes it easy to find PGs. So we'll turn Gabrielius on, which means it swings for 33k, which goes over our counter heal Niltji, which means we need to either keep a PG or be ready to no guard the Gabrielius, which is risky. And yeah, that's the most important thing you need to pay attention when it comes to Rezael. You need to watch out for Gabrielius. Levedras is the most powerful deck in the format. Like Rezael, Levedras has a similar problem where it has a lot of grade 3s in hand. Rezael has orders, but Levedras doesn't. But either way, it's a lot of shieldless cards in hand. So Granfia has a lot of early game advantage on that. But Levedras has a lot of draw. So even if the 10k doesn't really matter unless you're on a Roalua turn, being able to draw into PG is really, really helpful, especially when they can use Anadagaster to search for PGs already. So Levedras, if they have a bit of luck, Variance Man on our side, it's not particularly difficult for them to find PGs. I only put 2 Infinite Eye markers on our side, but Levedras, if they're smart about it, they'll put both 3 on our side because they can make more on their turn and go for the kill if we don't have shield, which we won't. Varga is not problematic in the way that a lot of other people think they are. The problem isn't that they have removal. The problem is that Boulder Axe is very good rush. And that means that for the 2 battle phases we had to put up with them, Boulder Axe is strong and draws cards, and Rokusei, not only does it help draw cards, but it blocks our intercept, which means our Broccoli can't be on field to be a 10k shield. We have to keep it in hand, otherwise it's a waste. And when we CB1 draw for Broccoli, we might not get the shield value back out of it. So Varga's a problem because it draws enough to find PGs, but we can't keep up with its offensive and defensive prospects. El Calibra's a problem in a different direction because it's a going second deck that you might see more often. It has the power to blow us out of the water. Granfia can't block El Calibra attacks very easily, but it'll also opt to sometimes blind second because it can take advantage of Shalkub to swing 5 times, which we can't guard. And sometimes it'll do that because it knows that Levadrus will take the going first and it wants to crack back on it, especially when it has Divine Skill and the opponent might not be ready to handle that. But Granfia does have really good matchups against Stride decks. Stride decks do draw a lot more early, so they might have a better handle on guarding the early rush, but they are slower to warm up power-wise, so it's a lot easier to live to your kill turn, and they might not necessarily have the ability to get to their PGs in time. For example, Shiranui gets big hands after it's able to draw into its Defensing Roar, its Sekie. Messiah doesn't start drawing a lot really until it gets access to drawing off its unlock. Chrono Jet has to, get its generics. Same with Harry. Nairos and Luard are able to search out PGs, but if they only search out one PG, you're perfectly fine. Because those two decks don't really have the ability to compete in terms of early game shield, in my opinion. So let's talk about future support. And this is the part I'm kind of down about because I'm not optimistic about the support that Granfia will get. Ideally, I'd like to keep my hopes high, but if I think support comes in the future, it might come in the form of Estacion support because they use the same plant gauge mechanic. In the trial deck, Estacion comes with Solitario Frio, which is a crit beatstick that turns on the crit when you have 3 plant gauges, which means Granfia can use it. But the problem is that Solitario Frio needs to be called by card effect, which is not great for Granfia because we can't afford space to run Diantha or say Spiritual Body Condensation. So I think in the future, if they intend to design support for both Estacion and Granfia, I don't think Granfia is going to be able to take advantage of that support as well as we would like. The other form that I think support might come in is as a masks, which isn't the worst thing considering I'm playing this deck as a going second deck, but it would take up a lot more deck slots. And I don't really like that considering we're already running low on deck slots and I'm already cutting PGs to make my rush more aggressive and my kill turns more consistent. Pardon me. But the reason I think this is the most likely way is because we don't have the Energy Blast 3 Wretch for Stoicheia yet. And Stoicheia has a lot of Wretches. Masks units like Zorga, Leonorn, Magnolia. So I think it's bound to come at some point. The problem is that the only 2 units that could get a masks at this point are Flagberg and Granfia. And I don't think it's going to be Flagberg. I think Granfia is more likely because Granfia's gotten a lot less support, whilst Flagberg's gotten okay support over the couple sets they've gotten a triple rare and a double rare. So I think Granfia might be the Stoicheia masks unit that justifies the printing of a new Energy Blast 3 Wretch for Stoicheia. So that is the end of the video. This is the first video, so I don't expect this to do particularly well. I don't think this is particularly pleasant to listen to considering I don't have a setup and the recording is kind of not great. I don't have the public speaking skills. I've been stuttering quite a bit, but I hope to do some more content in the future. The Stoicheia decks I do have that I can do profiles on are quite limited, but I do have some other decks that I'm interested in making deck profiles on, especially since I play a lot of decks that are a bit more niche, I would say. I don't really own any meta decks other than Eleglemma Batman, but if you ever catch me on the Different Fight server, you can say hi. I go by Yotsubro. You might see some people making fun of me because I bought Hakusui and Remred at $25. But yeah, comment, subscribe, whatever the YouTube spiel is, and I'll see you in the future. All right.